H, Day 7, the first of 3 videos regarding Day 7 of the Chronology of Humanity, prepared by Father and Son team, George and Dana Brown. Quote, "And wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times, and strength of salvation. The fear of the Lord is his treasure." Unquote. Isaiah 33:6. The Chronology of Humanity. Okay, we start with 0 and we go for 120 jubilees, or 6,000 years, to the turning point in the spring of 1996 AD. Then we begin Day 7, the Firstfruits enter the eternal kingdom here. Okay, so back at 0 now, we had planet Earth created with attributes of age. Then we jump down to the 4th millennia, to 5 BC, birth of Jesus Christ. So then we have 3 days and a half until the end of these wonders. Now note that the 3rd and the 7th day are exactly the same. They're the Lord's Day, the 7th millennial day, and the 3rd day. Picturing the logo. The 7-day week plus 8th day from creation, Genesis 2 verses 1 to 3, and the 3.5 days from 5 BC, Exodus 19 11 to 19, Deuteronomy 26:12, and Daniel 7:25, 12:6 and 7, and Revelation 11:11 and 12, and 12:14. So the logo here is very, very important. The gathering begins on the 7th day. The 7th day we have the Firstfruits. This is the first of 3 tiers of saints. 1,000 years later, the whole 7th day is complete. Then we start with the main harvest. And 500 years later, the first half of the 8th day is completed. We have the latter harvest. 150 years later, we have the tares, the servants. So we have the 7th day and the 8th day. Day 7, 6,001 through 7,000 from creation. Day 7 is the Lord's Day. It is the focus of all history and prophecy. It is when the Firstfruits enter the eternal kingdom. Now, 3 important things happen as the 7th day evolves. 1, the Great Regeneration got underway. 2, the Firstfruits enter the eternal kingdom, Jesus' dominion here on earth. It's the Southland under God's right. 3, those not in the eternal kingdom face growing tribulations here on earth. It's the land of the north, under God's left, Satan's dominion. In the spring of 1996 AD, the trumpet, a communication device called the Internet, began sounding loud and long. Loud, it's heard around the world, and long, 24/7, it never ceases. Yes, the worldwide Internet is that prophetic trumpet mentioned in Exodus 19 verses 11 to 19. The turning point arrived in the spring of 1996 AD. God no longer tolerates human disobedience. Disobedient people are locked out of heaven on earth for 1,000 years or far more, as hell on earth grows and grows. Genesis 6:3, Leviticus 25:8 to 10, and Isaiah 14:17. Satan refuses to open the door of the prisoners. The Firstfruits enter the eternal kingdom first. The turning point began, the 1,000-year wait for multitudes unto the main harvest. Revelation 20, verses 4 to 7. Another look at the turning point. From 0 we have 120 jubilees, or 6,000 years, to the turning point in the spring of 1996 AD. The seventh day then begins and is 1,000 years long, 20 jubilees. So we have 1,000-year days, the 7-day week plus an 8th day, and 3 days and a half from the 5 BC birth of Jesus. So we have 120 jubilees times 50 years per jubilee, which equals 6,000 years. Again, Genesis 6:3, Leviticus 25:8-10. Olivet divides. The upper world saints enjoy eternal life, health, and so forth. There's a sea of glass, an invisible division, class separation, and below is the nether world, sinners waiting to get out, but none can depart until the 8th day now. Zephaniah 3:14-20, Isaiah 4:2-6, Revelation 15:2-4, and 5 verse 10, Luke 16 verse 26. The firstfruits 42-year hour, 124 times 1,000-year day. Introduced the seventh millennial day. Okay, so we have the spring of 1982. Began 14 years until the turning point in the spring of 1996, which is Revelation 6:17 says that the seventh day began. Now, the next major point is the spring of 2017. Okay, so we have 14 preparation years before the turning point. Then we have 21 years, a half an hour, wait or pause. Revelation 8:1, from 6001 to the spring of 2017 AD. Okay, we have salvation closes now for potential firstfruits in the spring of 2010 AD. That's Daniel 9:2 and 26. Okay, now 6022 from creation, beginning in the spring of 2017 to the spring of 2018, we have, that's AD years, we have the glorious solemn assembly. Okay, 5 links describe the 42-year hour. 1 is the turning point, it's a key reference point. And 2 is time bridges. They lock the 42-year hour in place. And 3 is the 7 annual holy periods. They lay out a schedule of events. And 4, previews of tribulations, the beginning of sorrows, speak of 35 years. And 5 is Jeremiah and Daniel's 70 years. They help position things. So these are keys for understanding the end times. The turning point in the spring of 1996. Actually, the count begins at 0. So we have 6,000 years to the turning point. And then the Lord's Day begins. Now back at 0 again, we have planet Earth created with attributes of age. Then came the flood in 1655 to 1656. The Exodus from Egypt and Babylon. And then the 5 BC birth of Christ. And note that Columbus came in 1492 AD. Then we had the preparation years. Humanity's leap into space from the horse and buggy and doing without. The turning point, defined by 120 jubilees, or 6,000 years from creation. Genesis 6:3 again, Leviticus 25:8-10. Quote, "And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years, 120 Jubilee cycles." That's Genesis 6:3. Now, note that my spirit shall not always strive with man. So man has both spirit and he also has flesh. So that's a little explanation of 6:3 there. A significant turning point, 120 cycles of 50 years each, equals 6,000 years from creation until the spring of 1996 AD. Genesis 6:3 and Leviticus 25:8-10. This key point marks the beginning of the seventh day from creation and the beginning of the third day from 5 BC. Both herald the Lord's Day and define special events now evolving. Exodus 19:11-19. So humanity received the double portion on the sixth day. Exodus 16:5. Time bridges. 1. Position the firstfruits 42-year hour relative to humanity's history. And 2. The time bridges lock the firstfruits 42-year hour in place. And 3. The firstfruits 42-year hour provides a template for subsequent 42-year hours. Okay, now we have a human shepherd was anointed back in the spring of 1978 AD. Then we had 4 years before the firstfruits 42-year hour began in spring of 1982. So we have 14 preparation years until 1996, the spring of 1996, when the Lord's Day began. So there we have 6001 commences the Lord's Day. In Revelation 8:1 speaks of half an hour, 21-year pause until the spring of 2017 AD. That's when the glorious solemn assembly 6022 from creation begins. The end of the hour, of course, is 2024 AD. So we have all these different time bridges. We go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Okay, A, Alexander's death begins 2,300 years, count of 2,300 years, from the spring of 323 BC. That's Daniel 8:14. Brings us to the spring of 1978 AD. 5982 is completed from creation. So begin cleansing the sanctuary with the human shepherd's anointing. Micah 7:15. Okay, so now we go on to B. B moves into place using the same 2,300 years from Daniel 8:14. If we begin that when the 4 generals, Alexander's 4 generals, divided the kingdom in the spring of 319 BC, that's 3687, brings us down to 5987, 2,300 years. That's when we begin cleaning the sanctuary to start the 42-year hour. Started the 14 preparation years at that point. Okay, Daniel's 2625 years. That's 1,290 years plus 1335 years. Gives us 2625 years. Okay, now, depending upon where you started, in one case we started at Ahaz's death. That's Isaiah 14:26-28. Ahaz's death was in 3385 from creation. We moved the timeline back 10 years to 3375, 3376 from creation. That brings C through the year 6000. That makes a little sense right there. So the dial was moved backwards 10 degrees, 10 years, so man would understand what's going on. So Daniel 12, 11 and 12 bring these two sets of times into focus. 1290 and 1335, a total of 26-25 years. Now, when the dial is moved back to C, we have 2 Kings 20, 9 to 11. Then we move the dial in the opposite direction. We move it back to where it's supposed to be. In Isaiah 38, 8 and 37, 3. 37:3 says, "Oh, we're brought to the birth, but nobody's being born." So what's going on here? So we have the human shepherd anointed back in the spring of 1978. And then 4 years later, we have the spring of 1982 AD. Began 14 preparation years, and the Lord's Day began in the spring of 1996 AD. That's 6001 from creation. We have Revelation 8:1. A half-hour pause, 21-year pause. So if we first look at D, doesn't make sense. D is sitting out here in the middle of nowhere, 10 years down the line from the Lord's Day, when the Lord's Day began. Then, of course, we have the glorious solemn assembly in the spring of 2017 AD, the year 6022. And the conclusion of the hour is in 2024 AD. So these are the time bridges now we're coming up with. So D sitting here doesn't make sense. So when you move it back to C, it makes a great deal of sense to the naive person just beginning to understand things. Now we have the turning point in the spring of 1996. We have 6,000 years. Then the Lord's Day began. And after 2 days, in the third day, he will raise us up. And that 2 days is 2,000 years from 5 BC, birth of Jesus. So now that starts to put the 42-year hour into perspective. We have 6,000 years from creation. And that brings us up to E. We have Exodus 19:11. Speaks of the third day, and then we have Hosea 6:2. Aha! The 6 water pots all turned to wine during the first 6,000 years. 6 filled water pots. 6,000 years. 6 days have been completed. Genesis 6:3 again. Leviticus 25, 8 to 10 tells us that Jubilee is 50 years. In Exodus 16, 5 and 20, 8 to 11, it speaks of the 7th day. In John 2:6. So that brings us to F, which is 6,000 years. So the word has been turned to wine, and wine is an intoxicating beverage. You drink too much of it and you're in trouble. So we begin the 3rd and 7th days, which are one and the same day. Hosea 6:2, Genesis 2, 1 to 3, Exodus 20, verse 8 to 11, and 31, 12 to 17, and 35, 1 to 3. It says if you don't keep the 7th day, it's death. In other words, you're not in the kingdom, so you will die. John 2:1 and verses 10 to 20. Exodus 19:11 to 19. So again, look at those 6 water pots, the 6,000 years. That is point G in our chronology time bridges. They lock the 42-year hour in place. Okay, Daniel's 25-20 years. The cycle is 360. So we use 360 years times 7. 7 cycles. We have 25-20 years. Daniel 4, verse 16, 23, 25 and 32. Speaks of 7 times 360, or 20 years. They began when Nebuchadnezzar was made king. His father died, and he went back to Babylon and was anointed king in 3502 from creation. So we have 20 years lead us up through H, which is 6021 from creation. So that marks the end of the beginning of sorrows. We have 35 years, 14 years, and 21 years. Rather interesting. Time bridges define specific points that establish key points of the special 42-year hour, the Firstfruits 42-year hour. Therefore, the basic chronology must be accurate, otherwise the time bridges do not fit. Again, time bridges position the initial 42-year hour. 7 annual holy periods lay out an amazing schedule of events within each 42-year hour. Now, a very important point is that each day represents 1 year in prophecy. Numbers 14:34 and Ezekiel 4:6. Again, note that each day represents 1 year. The annual holy periods are the first and the third months. So we start right with the beginning of the 42-year hour. And the 10th year is the separation of lambs, firstfruits. It's not a holy day. The 10th year in the spring of 1991 to 1992 AD. With separation from sin. It's telling you to get your act straight. Alright, now they have the 120th Jubilee year. Liberty is proclaimed. Leviticus 25:8 and 11 and Genesis 6:3. Isaiah 37:3 is, we're brought to the birth, but nobody's being born. And 32:10 of Isaiah, and Isaiah 49:9, and Isaiah 61:1, and Isaiah 14:17 says Satan opens not the house of his prisoners. So we have the first holy day of the holy periods, and that's Passover, 14th year. Well, many people were passed over on Passover. So the annual holy periods of the first and the third months continue. The first and 7 days of the week of unleavened bread are to be kept holy, and the 15th through the 21st. And the 14th, of course, was Passover. And the 15th is unleavened bread. And the first and the 7th days are to be kept holy. The spring of 1996 begins then through the spring of 2003. So after unleavened bread, we have Pentecost. 2 holy days. They are in the first and the third months. The first month is the 22nd day of the first month, and the first and 50th days of Pentecost extend unto on or about 12 Sivan. That's the 12th day of the third biblical month. Okay, now moving the dial ahead, it's interesting because we move it to the 10th year, prefigured by the 10th day of the 7th month. That's the Day of Atonement. When you learn the holy periods, you recognize the 10th year as atonement, but that's part of the 7th month. So let's look at God's annual holy periods of the 7th month. They prefigure events during the 7th millennium. All right, we start the 7th month with the turning point in the spring of 1996. That's the Fast of Trumpets. And the trumpets herald the Lord's Day. So that's item 4. So we have a rather interesting approach here now. The 7th month is explaining what's going on in the 7th millennium. All right, now we get the Fast of Atonement, the 10th day. 6010 from creation. In the spring of 2006. Ends in the spring of 2006. So atonement, that's the second Passover. Atonement year, 2005, 2006, spring to spring. Multitudes are passed over for a second time for entering the firstfruits. And that is the mysterious point D on the time bridges. Next, we have the Week of Tabernacles. Living in booths, temporary shelters, from the 15th to the 21st day of the 7th month, the Week of Tabernacles, spring 2010 to spring of 2017. Now note, there's only one day is a holy day, and that's the first day of Tabernacles, and that comes 6015. That represents the celebration of those in the kingdom, whereas there's nothing to celebrate in the end of this period of time for those that didn't make it. So we have a rather interesting period here, the 7 days of the Week of Tabernacles. 7 days are followed by the glorious solemn assembly for the firstfruits. That's the 22nd year, 6022 from creation. The solemn assemblies, spring 2017 to 2018. Okay, God's 7 annual holy periods review now. They lay out a key schedule within the firstfruits, 42-year hour. Leviticus 23, 1 to 44 have the holy periods. Numbers chapters 28, 16 through 29, 38. Now, an important point to recognize here is that Jesus' 7 reappearances occurred as follows. 4 times on one unleavened bread. That means he was in the grave only about 14 and a half hours. He reappeared twice to women outside the tomb, and again en route to Emmaus, and finally to apostles and disciples in Herod's temple, observing 1 UB, one unleavened bread. The 5th reappearance was on 7 unleavened bread to disciples, observing 7 UB in the temple. Now note that the apostles are not present because Jesus told the women to tell his apostles to meet him in Galilee. That's 100 miles north, more than 100 miles north of Jerusalem. So the 6th reappearance was the very next day on one Pentecost to apostles in Galilee. They were fishing. They were working. That's a no work day. That's one of Peter's downfalls. And the 7th reappearance was on 50 Pentecost to apostles on the mount in Galilee. The first one in Galilee was in Tiberias, where they were fishing. And Jesus told them to throw the net on the other side of the ship, and they pulled up 153 fish. 153 fish is a very important number. So previews of tribulations now, the beginning of sorrows, what to expect and when. These previews describe millennial tribulations while laying out the initial 35 years of each 42-year hour. So the beginning of sorrows provides a progressive growth of troubles, clearly described in Revelation 6:1 through 16:21, again in Leviticus 26 verses 14 to 34, and in Ezekiel 14:12 to 21. You also find them in Zechariah 14 verse 12 to 19, thereabouts. Revelation speaks of these cumulative tribulations as 1, the 7 seals, 2, the 7 trumpets, 3, the 7 thunders, and 4, the 7 plagues. So the beginning of sorrows here now. Leviticus 26:14-33, Revelation 6:1 through 16:21. Opening the seven seals begins with this 42-year hour, the 14 preparation years. Then you have the half hour, 21-year pause. Now these seven seals go right to the end, the spring of 2017 AD, the beginning of the year 6022. So note that the seventh seal, keep your eye on the seventh seal. The seventh seal is sounding the seven trumpets. So we have the seven trumpets now that continue on through to the end of time. So the tribulations are increasing. They've been increasing, and people can see it if they look. So keep your eye on the seventh trumpet, which became the seven thunders. So each one goes right to the very end. So the seven thunders, the voices of the seven thunders. We have, just before the seven thunders, now we have Jesus with the 144,000 firstfruits. So the firstfruits and Jesus get together during the initial trumpets, first 6 trumpets. Aha! That means the firstfruits are with the Word of God. You have a book there that represents Jesus. Okay, now watch the seventh thunder. See, the seventh thunder is the pouring out of the 7 plagues. And you run right to the very end. That's your tribulations, the previews of tribulations to come. And that's the end of the 35 years. So we have a resumption of tribulations after a 5-year Selah, or pause, celebrating the glorious solemn assembly. If you're not in it, you're in the tribulations when they resume. It's going to be hell on earth. Okay, Jeremiah and Daniel's 70-year periods. They're 2 different periods. They call attention to a special 30-year interval. We have Jeremiah's 70 years, 1918 to 1988 AD. Then we have Daniel's 70 years, 1948 AD to 2018 AD. That leaves us 30 years of rather interesting events that occur after Jeremiah's 70 years, but during Daniel's 70 years. So 1988 to 2018 AD, spring to spring, has been evolving as a very, very interesting period. All right, preparing for the second great escape. There's 1,000-year wait until the main harvest. So we have the firstfruits, the great escape on the lower left side, in the spring of 1996. The hour is underway. So we have Revelation 20:4-6. It explains this 1,000-year wait. It mentions it there. So there's 20 jubilees, the whole Seventh Millennium Day. And that ends with the beginning of the 8th millennium, a second opportunity for those passed over for firstfruits. That begins in the spring of 2996 AD. Why wait 1,000 years? The 7th day is 1,000 years from start to finish. So on the left we have the beginning of the firstfruits 42-year hour in the spring of 1982. You have 14 preparation years to the turning point. Then you have 14 more years until salvation is closed, and 14 more years to the end of the firstfruits 42-year hour. Then after the 1,000-year wait, you start in again with preparation years for 14 years. Then we come to the beginning of the 8th millennium in the spring of 2996 AD. And 14 more years and salvation is closed, and 14 more years to the end of the main harvest, 42-year hour. 3 times 14 equals 42 years. Quote, so all the generations from Abraham, when the promise was given, and to David, the chief human shepherd, are 14 generations. And from David unto the carrying away unto Babylon, the close of salvation, are 14 generations. And from the carrying away unto Babylon unto Jesus Christ, his kingdom, are 14 generations. That's Matthew 1:17. 3 opportunities to enter the eternal kingdom as firstfruits here on earth for the glorious solemn assembly in the 22nd year of the 7th day. Okay, the first opportunity was Passover year, the 14th year of the first month. The second opportunity was Atonement year, the 10th year of the 7th millennium. And the third opportunity is when salvation closes for firstfruits at the end of Daniel's 62nd year. So Daniel's 62nd year is very important. Daniel 9:2 and 26. So note that 14, 14, and 14 are Matthew 1:17. On the glorious solemn assembly, the 22nd year of the 7th day. It's right there in the middle of the whole thing. Okay, after the 1,000-year wait, now we have the end of the Lord's Day, and then we begin the 8th day. 7,000 will be completed, and 7,001 begins. In Revelation 8:1, all over again. You have the 21-year half-hour wait for the main harvest. And earlier, before that, we have the 14 preparation years for the main harvest. They actually begin during the 7th day. And finally, you have 70:22 from creation, the main harvest, solemn assembly. The main harvest, 42-year hour, is prefigured by the firstfruits, 42-year hour. This completes part 1 of day 7, the chronology of humanity.